"Sir, deliveries go around the back." The words were calm, almost polite, but they stopped Marcus Ellington mid-step like a locked gate he hadn't expected to see. The tall iron entrance to the mansion stood open just a few feet ahead of him, its black bars glinting under the soft amber glow of the security lights. Beyond it stretched a long stone driveway, nearly 200 feet of polished granite that curved toward a white modern estate sitting quietly against the dark North Carolina sky. The house was still. The windows were dark. And yet every brick of that place existed because Marcus Ellington had paid for it. The evening air carried the faint scent of pine and freshly watered grass from the surrounding acres. Marcus had returned earlier than planned from a business trip to Seattle, a flight delayed twice before finally landing in Charlotte close to midnight. His driver had dropped him at the gate, and Marcus had decided to walk the final stretch himself. It was something he liked to do after long trips, a few quiet minutes under the night sky, before stepping back into the rhythm of responsibility that came with running a company valued in the billions. But tonight that walk ended before it began. 3 security guards stood between him and the driveway. Their uniforms were crisp, their radios clipped neatly to their shoulders, their expressions calm but firm. One of them, a broad-shouldered man with a gray buzz cut and the confident posture of someone used to giving orders, stepped forward just enough to block Marcus's path without raising his voice. "Sir, I said deliveries go around the back entrance." Marcus blinked once, not in anger, but in mild surprise, the kind of pause that comes when reality briefly misaligns with expectation. He glanced past the man toward the house again, the sleek architecture rising against the starlit sky, like a quiet monument to a lifetime of work. 5 years earlier this property had been nothing but rolling grassland outside the city limits. Marcus had walked the land himself before construction even began, boots sinking slightly into red Carolina soil, while architects explained where the windows would face the sunrise and where the glass walls would reflect the lake behind the house. Tonight those same windows looked down at him while he stood outside his own gate. The guard waited for him to move. Marcus adjusted the sleeve of his charcoal travel jacket and spoke in an even tone that carried neither frustration nor defensiveness. "This is my house." The other 2 guards exchanged a glance, the subtle kind of look people share when they assume someone is joking. The man in front tilted his head slightly, studying Marcus the way someone might evaluate a stranger who had wandered too far into the wrong neighborhood. "I'm going to need you to step away from the property, sir." His voice remained measured, professional, and completely certain. Marcus noticed the new badge on the man's chest. Daniel Whitmore. The name meant nothing to him, but the stance did. Whitmore stood with the confidence of someone who believed the rules were clear and that he was enforcing them correctly. The problem was that Whitmore had only been hired 2 weeks earlier. Marcus had approved the expansion of the security contract after his company's recent acquisition made national headlines. More media attention meant more people curious about where he lived. The solution had seemed simple: upgrade the security team. Now that decision stood directly in front of him, blocking the gate to his own home. Marcus slipped one hand into his pocket and looked back toward the driveway. The stone path gleamed faintly under the moonlight, leading toward the quiet silhouette of the mansion where his mother was probably asleep in the guest wing, and where tomorrow morning the kitchen would smell like coffee and fresh biscuits just the way she liked them. He had built the place for her after the company went public, a promise he had made years earlier when she worked night shifts as a nurse, and he coded software in a cramped apartment that barely fit a second-hand desk. Whitmore took another step forward, closer now, as if to gently guide Marcus away from the gate. "Sir, if you're here for work, maintenance trucks come through the service drive on the east side." Marcus studied the man for a moment longer. Not angry, not offended, just thoughtful. The quiet hum of insects filled the warm Carolina night. Somewhere in the distance a car passed along the highway beyond the tree line. Marcus slowly pulled his phone from his pocket, the screen lighting his face in a soft blue glow. Whitmore watched him carefully, arms folded, confident that the situation was already handled. Marcus scrolled once through his contacts, his thumb steady, then paused over a single name. He lifted the phone to his ear and waited, the silent house standing behind the gate like it was holding its breath. The phone rang twice before the call connected, the soft electronic tone blending into the quiet night air beyond the gate. Marcus Ellington held the device calmly against his ear while the three security guards watched with the cautious patience of people certain that time would prove them correct. The tall guard with the gray buzz cut shifted his weight slightly, his boots scraping against the gravel near the edge of the driveway entrance. The iron gate behind him hummed quietly as the automatic system adjusted its internal lock. Marcus listened for a moment, then spoke in the same steady voice he had used moments earlier. "Good evening, Claire. I apologize for calling this late. I believe there is a small misunderstanding at the front gate." On the other end of the line, Claire Matthews straightened instantly in the quiet security office located inside the mansion's lower level. Claire had worked as the estate manager for nearly 4 years, long enough to recognize Marcus's voice even when it arrived unexpectedly after midnight. She glanced toward the wall of security monitors where the camera feed from the front entrance displayed 3 guards standing under the amber floodlights and a familiar figure just outside the gate. For a brief second, she thought the system had malfunctioned because Marcus Ellington was not supposed to be outside the property. His flight from Seattle had been scheduled to arrive the following morning. Her chair rolled back quickly as she stood. "Mr. Ellington, you are at the gate right now?" "Yes," Marcus replied calmly, his gaze resting on the long driveway beyond the bars. "It appears the team on duty has not yet met me." The line went silent for half a heartbeat as Claire processed what she was seeing on the monitor. The new security crew had been assigned during Marcus's absence, part of a contract expansion approved after the company's valuation crossed the $4 billion mark earlier that year. The additional personnel had come with impressive resumes, former military backgrounds, professional training, strong recommendations. But none of those reports mentioned the simplest detail that now mattered more than anything else. They had never seen the owner of the estate in person. Outside the gate, the guards remained composed, though one of them leaned slightly toward Whitmore and murmured something under his breath. Whitmore did not answer. His eyes stayed fixed on Marcus with the confident focus of someone who believed he was protecting the property exactly as he had been instructed to do. Marcus, meanwhile, stood quietly beneath the lights. The late summer air carried a faint warmth, somewhere around 78 degrees, comfortable even after midnight. A soft breeze moved through the line of oak trees along the property fence, stirring the leaves with a sound that almost resembled distant rain. Marcus listened to Claire moving quickly in the background of the call, the faint echo of footsteps and the creak of a chair rolling away from the security desk. "I will be there in a moment," she said. "Please stay where you are." Marcus smiled slightly at that, though the expression was small enough that the guards probably did not notice. "I do not intend to go anywhere," he replied. The call ended quietly. For a moment nothing changed at the gate. Whitmore crossed his arms and tilted his head toward the other 2 guards, as if confirming their shared assumption that the stranger outside the gate would soon realize the conversation had accomplished nothing. Marcus lowered the phone and slipped it back into his jacket pocket. He did not attempt to explain further. Instead, he looked once more down the long curve of the driveway leading toward the mansion. The property lights reflected softly along the polished stone path, guiding the eye toward the glass walls of the house that stood silent beneath the night sky. He had designed the lighting that way on purpose. After years of traveling between conference rooms, airports, and board meetings across the country, he had wanted the walk home to feel calm, simple, quiet, a place where the noise of the world stopped at the gate. Tonight, however, the noise had followed him here in the form of 3 men who believed they were doing their job perfectly. Whitmore finally spoke again, his tone still polite, but now carrying a hint of impatience. "Sir, I am going to ask you one more time to step away from the entrance." Marcus looked at him thoughtfully, almost curious about the certainty behind the man's words. In the distance, beyond the trees lining the driveway, a pair of headlights suddenly appeared along the private road leading toward the estate. The glow grew brighter as a dark vehicle turned through the final bend, its tires rolling smoothly over the gravel path that connected the mansion to the front gate. The headlights rolled slowly along the private road, cutting through the darkness like a quiet announcement that something was changing. The vehicle moved at a steady pace, its beams sliding across the iron bars of the gate and reflecting briefly off the polished badge on Daniel Whitmore's uniform. For the first time since Marcus had arrived, one of the guards turned his head toward the driveway behind them. The sound of tires on gravel grew clearer, a low steady crunch that echoed through the stillness of the surrounding trees. Whitmore did not step aside, but the slight tightening in his posture suggested that he was beginning to reassess the situation. Marcus noticed it immediately. He remained where he stood, hands relaxed at his sides, his gaze drifting briefly toward the approaching lights before returning to the quiet silhouette of the house beyond the gate. From this distance, the mansion looked almost unreal, its glass walls reflecting faint moonlight across the lake behind it. The architecture had been designed to feel open and calm, with wide windows facing the water and soft lighting built into the stone along the driveway. Marcus had chosen every detail carefully when the house was built. Tonight, those same lights illuminated the strange scene unfolding at the entrance. The dark vehicle came to a smooth stop just inside the property line. Its engine idled quietly for a moment before the driver door opened, and a woman stepped out quickly, closing it with a controlled motion that suggested urgency, without panic. Claire Matthews moved across the gravel with confident strides, the beam from the security lights catching the edge of her navy blazer as she approached the gate. Even from a distance, Whitmore could see that she was not a visitor or a contractor. She walked like someone who belonged on the property. One of the younger guards leaned closer to Whitmore and spoke softly, but Whitmore did not respond. His attention was now fixed on Claire as she reached the gate and stopped directly beside the control panel. Her eyes moved immediately past the guards to Marcus, standing on the other side. For a brief second, her expression shifted, the small, unmistakable recognition of someone realizing that a situation had unfolded exactly as described. "Mr. Ellington," she said through the bars of the gate, her voice respectful but steady. "I am very sorry about this delay." The words hung in the air like a quiet signal that something important had just been confirmed. Whitmore frowned slightly, his gaze moving from Claire to Marcus and back again, as if trying to piece together a conversation he had not heard. Claire turned toward the keypad mounted beside the gate and entered a short sequence of numbers. The lock mechanism hummed softly. Metal shifted against metal as the heavy iron gate began to slide open with slow mechanical precision. The movement was smooth, almost silent, but in that moment it seemed to echo across the entire driveway. Marcus stepped forward calmly as the opening widened. He did not rush. He simply walked through the gate with the quiet confidence of someone returning home after a long journey. Claire moved aside immediately to give him space, lowering her head slightly in acknowledgement. "Welcome back, sir. I was not expecting you until tomorrow morning." Marcus nodded once, the faintest trace of a smile touching his expression. "My flight arrived earlier than planned. It appears the schedule change created some confusion." Behind them, Whitmore remained motionless for a moment longer, his arms slowly lowering from their folded position. The younger guard beside him shifted his weight uncomfortably, glancing between Marcus and Claire as if waiting for someone to explain what had just happened. Marcus paused just inside the gate and looked back toward the three guards. The security lights cast long shadows across the gravel, stretching their silhouettes across the ground like quiet questions that had not yet been answered. Claire followed his gaze, and the meaning of that silence was clear to her. Whitmore cleared his throat slightly, the confident tone from earlier no longer quite as certain. "Sir, if there has been a misunderstanding, we were only following procedure." Marcus studied him for a moment, his expression thoughtful rather than angry. The night breeze moved gently through the trees along the fence, carrying the faint scent of lake water and summer grass across the property. For several seconds no one spoke. The long driveway behind Marcus waited in calm silence, leading toward the house where the lights in the upper windows had begun to glow faintly as the interior system detected movement near the entrance. Marcus finally turned his attention back to Claire. "Please make sure the rest of the staff knows I arrived early," he said quietly. "I would prefer that no one else is surprised tonight." Claire nodded immediately. "Of course, sir." She reached toward the small tablet clipped to her folder, already preparing to send the internal message that would quietly ripple through the estate staff within seconds. Behind them, the gate finished sliding open completely, leaving the entrance wide and unobstructed under the warm amber lights. The gravel beneath Marcus Ellington's shoes shifted softly as he continued forward through the open gate, the quiet sound blending with the distant hum of insects in the warm Carolina night. The long driveway stretched ahead of him, curving gently toward the house that stood illuminated now with a faint glow from the automatic interior lights that had awakened as the security system registered movement on the property. Claire Matthews walked half a step behind him, her tablet already in her hand as she finished sending the short message that would quietly alert the night staff that the owner had returned earlier than scheduled. Behind them, the 3 security guards remained near the gate, their earlier confidence replaced by an uneasy silence that lingered in the air like a question no one had yet answered. Marcus did not turn immediately. He walked several yards along the driveway before slowing slightly, the soft amber lights embedded along the stone path reflecting across the polished surface beneath his feet. The house looked peaceful from this distance, its tall windows facing the lake where the water moved gently in the night breeze. It was the kind of quiet Marcus had worked for his entire life, the reward for years of long nights building software in cramped offices, pitching ideas to investors who doubted him, and pushing through board meetings where he had often been the only person in the room who looked like him. Tonight, that same quiet had been interrupted at the front gate. Marcus finally paused and turned back toward the entrance. Claire followed his gaze. The gate remained open, the heavy iron frame casting long shadows across the gravel as Whitmore and the other 2 guards stood waiting in uncertain stillness. Whitmore stepped forward cautiously when he saw Marcus turn. His posture had changed, the earlier authority in his stance replaced by the careful tone of someone realizing the situation had not unfolded the way he expected. "Mr. Ellington," he began, his voice measured, "I want to apologize if our team caused any inconvenience tonight. We were not aware that you would be arriving at this hour." Marcus listened without interrupting. His expression remained calm, thoughtful, almost reflective as the night breeze moved gently through the oak trees lining the property fence. Claire remained beside him, silent for the moment, though the slight tightening of her shoulders suggested she understood that something important was unfolding. Whitmore continued, choosing his words carefully now. "Our instructions were to restrict entry to authorized individuals only. Since we had not previously met you, we followed the identification procedures outlined in the contract." Marcus nodded slowly as he heard the explanation. For a moment he said nothing. The quiet stretched across the driveway while the soft glow from the estate lights illuminated the scene in calm detail. The house stood behind him like a silent witness, its tall glass windows reflecting the faint shimmer of the lake beyond the lawn. When Marcus finally spoke, his voice remained steady, neither sharp nor angry. "Procedures are important," he said. "They exist to protect people and property." Whitmore seemed slightly relieved by the tone, interpreting the words as a sign that the situation might end without further consequence. "Yes, sir, exactly. That is what we intended to do tonight." Marcus studied him for another moment, his eyes calm but focused in a way that suggested he was considering something larger than the simple explanation being offered. Then he glanced briefly toward Claire. "Claire," he said quietly, "how long has this team been assigned to the property?" 2 weeks, sir," she replied immediately. "They began their rotation while you were traveling." Marcus nodded again, absorbing the information. 2 weeks was long enough for orientation briefings, property tours, and basic introductions to the estate staff. The night air remained still as the seconds passed. One of the younger guards shifted his stance again, the faint crunch of gravel under his boot echoing slightly in the silence. Marcus finally turned fully toward Whitmore and the others, his posture relaxed but unmistakably deliberate. The security lights above the gate cast a soft glow across his face as he spoke again, his voice calm, yet clear enough to carry across the open driveway. "When you protect a home," he said, "you are not only guarding the walls. You are guarding the people who live inside them." Whitmore listened carefully, his earlier certainty now replaced by the quiet realization that this conversation was no longer simply about a misunderstanding at a gate, but about something deeper that had unfolded during the last few minutes under the amber lights of the entrance. Whitmore listened to Marcus's words as the quiet night settled again around the entrance, the amber lights above the gate casting long shadows across the gravel, while the breeze from the lake carried the soft scent of water and pine through the trees. For several seconds he did not answer. The confidence he had carried earlier had faded into a more cautious awareness that the situation had shifted beyond a routine security check. Marcus remained standing calmly on the driveway, the stone path beneath his feet reflecting faint light from the embedded ground lamps that lined the approach to the house. Claire Matthews watched the exchange silently, her tablet now resting against her side as she observed the guards near the gate. Whitmore cleared his throat gently, choosing his next words carefully. "Sir, we followed the identification procedures that were explained during our assignment briefing. Without confirmation, we could not allow entry, regardless of what anyone claimed." Marcus nodded slightly, as if acknowledging the logic behind the statement. "That is true," he said calmly. "Procedures exist for a reason. But procedures are only as strong as the judgment of the people who apply them." Whitmore shifted his stance again, his boots pressing lightly into the gravel, while the younger guard beside him glanced toward Claire with an uncertain expression. Marcus continued speaking, his voice steady and even. "When someone arrives at the gate of a private residence and says the home belongs to them, there are several ways a situation like that can be handled. You can assume the person is lying. You can dismiss them without asking questions. Or you can verify the information before deciding what to do next." The words hung in the air for a moment. Whitmore's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in quiet reflection. "We did ask questions," he said after a pause. Marcus raised his eyebrows. "Slightly. Did you?" Whitmore hesitated. The younger guard beside him shifted again, the faint crunch of gravel beneath his boot breaking the silence. Marcus looked at them calmly, his posture relaxed yet unmistakably composed. "I said this was my house," he continued. "I was standing at the front gate. I was not demanding entry or raising my voice. I simply stated a fact." Claire watched Whitmore carefully as Marcus spoke. The estate manager had seen situations like this before in different forms. Sometimes misunderstandings were simple mistakes. Other times they revealed something deeper about how people made decisions in moments of uncertainty. Marcus turned slightly and looked back toward the house again. The lights inside the mansion had grown brighter as more rooms quietly illuminated through the automated system that recognized movement on the property. From the driveway, the home looked warm and welcoming, a quiet refuge after long weeks of travel and business negotiations. Marcus had built the place not only for comfort, but for family. His mother was sleeping inside at that very moment, unaware of the scene that had unfolded at the entrance. After a few seconds, Marcus turned back toward the gate. "Whitmore," he said gently, "how many homeowners have you personally met during security assignments like this?" Whitmore seemed slightly surprised by the question. "A few," he answered carefully. "Each property is different." Marcus nodded once. "That is true. Every property is different. Every family is different. But one thing remains the same. When you guard a home, you are protecting people, not just property lines." The younger guard lowered his eyes briefly, as if realizing the meaning behind the words. Whitmore remained still, absorbing the conversation with growing seriousness. Marcus took a slow breath and looked at Claire again. "Claire," he said quietly, "did the orientation briefing include photographs of the homeowner?" Claire's expression tightened slightly. "Yes, sir. The information packet includes identification photos for all senior staff and family members." Whitmore's shoulders stiffened slightly at that answer. Marcus did not raise his voice or change his tone. Instead, he simply studied the guards for a moment longer beneath the warm glow of the entrance lights. Sometimes people expect a mistake to be followed by anger or punishment. But Marcus Ellington had built his entire career on something different. Calm decisions made after careful observation. Tonight had begun with a misunderstanding at a gate. Yet as the quiet night continued around them, it was becoming clear that the real issue had never been about the gate at all. It was about what people choose to see when they look at someone standing in front of them. The quiet after Marcus's last words lingered beneath the amber glow of the security lights, the kind of silence that does not feel empty, but heavy with realization. The night breeze continued to move softly through the oak branches above the gate, rustling the leaves with a low whisper that seemed almost louder now that no one was speaking. Daniel Whitmore stood very still, the earlier firmness in his posture replaced by a thoughtful stiffness as the meaning of the conversation slowly settled in. The younger guard beside him shifted again, though this time the movement felt less like impatience and more like discomfort. Marcus Ellington remained where he was on the driveway, calm and composed, his hands resting loosely at his sides. The long stone path stretched behind him toward the illuminated house, the lights from the windows reflecting faintly across the surface of the lake beyond the lawn. For Marcus, the scene carried a quiet familiarity. He had returned home late from business trips many times before. Usually the gate opened without a second thought. Tonight had been different. Claire Matthews finally stepped slightly closer to him. Her voice measured but respectful when she spoke. "Sir, the orientation materials were distributed to every member of the new security team when their assignment began. They included identification photographs and property protocols." Whitmore's jaw tightened subtly at the statement. The implication was clear even though Claire had not raised her voice. The information that could have prevented the entire misunderstanding had been available from the very beginning. Whitmore looked briefly toward the younger guards, as if searching for confirmation that they remembered the briefing packet. Neither of them spoke. Marcus observed the exchange quietly. His eyes moved from Whitmore to the gate, and then to the long fence that surrounded the estate. Nearly 3 acres of land bordered by tall trees and carefully maintained gardens. The property had once been open farmland before the house was built, and Marcus had intentionally preserved much of the natural landscape so that the place would feel peaceful rather than imposing. Tonight the land felt calm, the air warm at about 76 degrees, the sound of water gently moving along the lake's edge barely audible in the distance. Marcus finally spoke again, his voice carrying across the short stretch of gravel between them. "I understand that security work requires caution. The responsibility you carry is important. When people trust you to guard their homes, they are trusting you with their safety and their privacy." Whitmore nodded slowly, though the motion felt less confident than before. "Yes, sir, that is correct." Marcus took a slow step forward along the driveway, not toward the gate but slightly to the side, as if giving himself space to look at the entire entrance from a different angle. The gate now stood fully open behind him, the metal frame reflecting soft light while the driveway curved toward the house like a quiet invitation home. But Marcus did not continue walking. Instead, he turned back once more toward the guards. "There is something else that security work requires," he said gently. "Awareness. Not only awareness of potential threats, but awareness of the people standing in front of you." Whitmore listened carefully now, his expression serious. Marcus continued in the same calm tone. "Tonight you saw a man arrive at a gate. You saw someone wearing travel clothes after a long flight. You saw someone who told you the house belonged to him. But what you did not see was the possibility that the statement might be true." The younger guard lowered his gaze toward the gravel. The quiet admission of that possibility hung in the air between them even though no one spoke the words directly. Claire remained silent beside Marcus, her posture respectful but firm as she allowed the conversation to unfold. Whitmore finally spoke again, his voice slower than before. "Sir, I admit that we did not consider that possibility strongly enough." Marcus studied him for a moment. The response was honest, and honesty mattered more than defensiveness in moments like this. The night continued to settle around the entrance, the estate lights casting warm reflections across the driveway, while the dark outline of the house stood behind Marcus like a calm witness to everything that had taken place. For a few seconds Marcus said nothing. He simply looked toward the gate, then back toward the men who had been standing there earlier with such certainty. When he spoke again, his voice remained steady and composed, but the meaning behind the words carried a quiet weight. "A home is not protected by locked gates alone," he said. "It is protected by the judgment of the people entrusted to guard it. And judgment begins with the willingness to see clearly what is standing right in front of you." Whitmore lowered his gaze for a moment after Marcus finished speaking, the gravel beneath his boots shifting slightly as he adjusted his stance beneath the warm glow of the entrance lights. The realization that had been building quietly during the last several minutes now settled fully across the small group standing near the gate. The night air remained calm at just over 75 degrees, the faint sound of water moving along the lake behind the house drifting through the trees like a slow breath across the property. Marcus Ellington stood still on the driveway, the illuminated mansion rising behind him in quiet symmetry, its tall glass walls reflecting soft light across the lawn. Claire Matthews watched both men carefully, understanding that the moment unfolding was no longer simply about a misunderstanding at the entrance, but about what came next. Whitmore finally lifted his eyes again and looked directly at Marcus. The earlier certainty that had defined his tone when the encounter began had disappeared completely. What remained now was something quieter, more reflective. "Sir," he said slowly, "I understand what you are saying. And I realize that tonight we did not handle the situation the way it should have been handled. The admission carried weight because it was honest. Marcus nodded slightly, acknowledging the effort it took to say it. One of the younger guards shifted beside Whitmore, his shoulders tightening slightly, as if he too understood that the moment had become larger than any one person standing at the gate. Marcus took a slow breath and glanced once more toward the house. From this distance, the lights inside the mansion created a warm glow that stretched across the driveway, like a quiet invitation to step inside and finally rest after a long day of travel. But Marcus did not move yet. Instead, he turned his attention back toward Whitmore. "When you work security," Marcus said calmly, "people will sometimes approach you with confidence even when they do not belong there. That is part of the job." Whitmore nodded once. "Yes, sir." Marcus continued, "But the difference between good judgment and poor judgment often appears in the questions we choose to ask. Tonight, there were many ways to verify the situation before deciding what to do." Whitmore's expression tightened again as he understood the meaning behind those words. The orientation packet, the identification photographs, the call to the estate office that could have been made at any moment. All of those options had existed before Marcus reached for his phone. Claire stepped forward slightly and spoke in a quiet, professional tone. "The protocol manual specifically instructs the team to contact the estate office if there is uncertainty regarding a person claiming residency." Whitmore exhaled slowly. The acknowledgement was clear. That step had not been taken. Marcus observed the exchange without any sign of anger. The calm way he carried himself seemed to make the silence heavier rather than lighter. The younger guard finally spoke for the first time, his voice hesitant but sincere. "Sir, we truly believed we were doing the right thing." Marcus looked at him and nodded gently. "I believe that you thought that," he said. "Intentions matter, but so do outcomes." The night breeze moved again through the trees, stirring the leaves with a low rustling sound that seemed to echo across the quiet estate. Marcus stepped a few inches closer to the gate, just enough for the security lights to fall fully across his face. The three guards could now see him clearly in the soft glow, the calm confidence in his posture, the quiet authority that came from years of leadership rather than raised voices or sudden anger. Whitmore straightened slightly as he watched him. "Sir," he said again, "I take responsibility for what happened tonight." Marcus studied him carefully. Responsibility was an important word. It meant the conversation had reached a point where the truth was no longer being avoided. For several seconds Marcus said nothing. He simply looked at the men standing near the gate, then glanced once toward Claire as if considering the next step. Claire understood the look immediately. She had worked with Marcus long enough to know that when he paused like this, he was not hesitating. He was deciding. Whitmore waited quietly now, no longer attempting to defend his earlier actions. The younger guards remained still beside him. The open gate behind them framed the long private road leading out toward the dark tree line, while the illuminated driveway behind Marcus led toward the warm glow of the house. Two paths, two directions. Marcus finally spoke again, his voice steady and thoughtful as the night air carried his words across the small distance between them. "Whitmore," he said, "tell me something honestly. When you looked at me standing outside that gate earlier tonight, what exactly did you see?" Whitmore did not answer immediately. The question hung in the night air beneath the warm amber lights, heavier than anything that had been said before. For the first time since the encounter began, the confident security supervisor seemed unsure where to look. His eyes moved briefly toward the gravel near his boots, then toward the open gate behind him, before finally returning to Marcus Ellington standing calmly on the driveway. The younger guards beside him remained silent, their earlier certainty now replaced by the uneasy awareness that the moment had become a test of honesty rather than authority. The breeze from the lake moved softly through the oak branches above them, the leaves whispering faintly against one another while the estate lights reflected across the stone driveway leading toward the quiet house. Whitmore exhaled slowly, as if weighing his words before allowing them to leave his mouth. "When I first saw you tonight," he said carefully, "I saw someone approaching the property on foot late at night. Someone I did not recognize. Someone dressed like he had just arrived from travel." Marcus listened without interrupting, his expression calm and attentive. Whitmore continued, choosing each sentence with visible effort. "The training we receive teaches us to assume caution first. When you said the house belonged to you, I believed you were making a claim that could not possibly be true." The younger guard shifted slightly beside him, the faint crunch of gravel breaking the silence for a brief moment. Whitmore looked at Marcus again, this time with a level of openness that had not been present earlier. "I assumed you were mistaken," he admitted. Marcus nodded slowly. "That is what you assumed," he said quietly. Whitmore's shoulders lowered slightly as the admission settled between them. For a few seconds no one spoke. The night remained calm, the soft glow from the house windows stretching across the driveway like a quiet reminder that the property was more than a collection of gates and fences. It was a home. Claire Matthews watched carefully from Marcus's side, understanding that this conversation had reached the moment where the truth beneath the misunderstanding had finally surfaced. Marcus took a slow breath and glanced toward the younger guards. "And you," he said gently, "what did you see when you looked at me tonight?" The youngest guard hesitated before answering. His voice was quiet, but sincere. "Sir, I saw someone the supervisor had already decided did not belong here." Marcus studied him thoughtfully. "That is an honest answer." The young man nodded slightly, his expression reflecting both embarrassment and relief at having spoken openly. Marcus looked back toward Whitmore again. "This is how assumptions work," he said calmly. "One person makes a quick judgment, and everyone else follows that judgment without questioning it." Whitmore did not argue. He knew the statement was accurate. The estate lights above the gate hummed softly as the automatic system adjusted their brightness, casting long reflections across the metal bars and the gravel beneath them. Marcus folded his hands loosely in front of him as he continued speaking. "I built my company by challenging assumptions. When people looked at a young software engineer from a modest neighborhood and assumed he could not lead a technology firm, I proved them wrong by working harder than they expected. When investors assumed that innovation only came from familiar places, I showed them ideas they had not considered." He paused briefly, the quiet of the night giving his words space to settle. But assumptions do not only exist in boardrooms and business deals. Sometimes they appear in ordinary moments. Moments like a man standing at the gate of his own home. Whitmore lowered his eyes again. The calm tone in Marcus's voice carried more weight than anger ever could. After several seconds, Whitmore spoke again. "Sir, I understand now what you were saying. And I understand that tonight we made a judgment too quickly." Marcus watched him carefully. "Understanding is the first step," he replied. Whitmore nodded once more. The younger guards stood silently beside him, both aware that the lesson unfolding beneath the warm estate lights would remain with them long after this night ended. Marcus glanced briefly toward Claire. She met his eyes and gave a subtle nod, already sensing the decision he was about to make. The quiet estate around them seemed to pause with anticipation, the open gate behind Whitmore framing the dark road that disappeared into the trees beyond the property. Marcus finally turned his attention back to the guards and spoke with the same calm authority that had guided every step of the conversation since the moment he arrived at the gate. Tonight was not simply about a misunderstanding. It was about judgment, responsibility, and the trust placed in people who guard a home. And when trust is broken, even unintentionally, the consequences cannot simply be ignored. Whitmore stood quietly beneath the security lights after Marcus finished speaking, the weight of the moment settling across the gravel driveway like the calm after a long storm. The open gate behind the guards framed the dark road leading away from the estate, while the illuminated driveway behind Marcus led toward the house, where warm light now glowed from several tall windows. The scene felt balanced between two directions, departure and belonging, consequence and reflection. Marcus Ellington remained calm, his posture relaxed but deliberate, the quiet authority in his presence unmistakable. The younger guards watched him carefully, aware that whatever came next would define how the night ended. Claire Matthews stood beside Marcus, silent but attentive, the faint glow from her tablet reflecting against the edge of her blazer. The breeze from the lake drifted again through the trees, carrying the scent of water and summer grass across the entrance. Marcus finally spoke, his voice steady and composed. "Whitmore, when a homeowner hires a security team, they are trusting that team to make careful decisions. That trust includes protecting the property, protecting the family inside the home, and protecting the dignity of the people who live there." Whitmore nodded slowly. "Yes, sir." Marcus continued, "And when that trust is broken, even by assumption rather than intention, the responsibility still remains." Whitmore lowered his gaze slightly, understanding what those words meant. The younger guards exchanged a brief glance, but said nothing. Marcus looked toward Claire for a moment. Claire, please contact the contracting company in the morning and inform them that the current team assigned to this property will be replaced. Claire nodded once, already understanding the decision before he finished speaking. Of course, sir. Whitmore did not protest. The calm tone in Marcus's voice had left little room for argument, and the supervisor knew the decision was final. He straightened slightly and spoke with quiet acceptance. I understand, sir. The younger guards looked down toward the gravel, their earlier confidence replaced by the quiet realization that the night had changed the course of their assignment. Marcus studied them for a moment, not with anger but with a measured seriousness that reflected the responsibility of leadership rather than personal frustration. This decision is not about punishment, he said calmly. It is about trust. A security team must be able to see clearly and think carefully before making judgments. Tonight that did not happen. Whitmore nodded again. I understand, sir. Marcus looked at him for another second and then added gently, I hope you remember this moment the next time you are responsible for protecting someone's home. Whitmore met his eyes and gave a small respectful nod. I will, sir. The silence returned once more beneath the amber lights, though this time it felt different. The tension that had filled the air earlier had softened into something quieter, a recognition that the lesson of the evening had reached its conclusion. Marcus turned slightly toward the driveway, the long path stretching ahead toward the house that waited beyond the lawn. Claire stepped forward to walk beside him as he began moving slowly up the stone drive. Behind them, the three guards remained near the open gate, their figures standing still against the dark outline of the road beyond the property. The estate lights illuminated Marcus's path with a warm glow, guiding him toward the entrance of the home he had built through years of persistence and determination. The house seemed peaceful again now, the calm atmosphere restored after the unusual encounter at the gate. As Marcus walked, the faint sound of water from the lake drifted across the lawn, blending with the quiet hum of the estate lighting system. The night felt still, balanced, almost reflective. Marcus paused briefly halfway up the driveway and looked back once more toward the entrance. The gate stood open beneath the lights, the place where the evening had begun. For a moment, he simply observed the scene, the guards standing quietly, the trees moving gently in the breeze, the road disappearing into darkness beyond the property line. Then he turned again toward the house and continued walking forward, the soft glow of the windows welcoming him home as the quiet of the estate settled once more into the peaceful rhythm of the night.